Right now I'm in downtown Washington at the Whiskey Rebellion Festival in Washington County, Pennsylvania. And this behind me is the David Bradford House. And David Bradford was a prominent figure in the Whiskey Rebellion from 1791 to 1794. David Bradford was born in 1760 to 1762, and he was a prominent person in the Washington County area. And by 1783, he had been appointed Deputy Attorney General of Washington County. Hey, how's it going? So David Bradford was appointed the Deputy General, and I got the Washington Wild Things here supporting the video. And so David Bradford was a prominent figure, like I said, of the Whiskey Rebellion. And when he was involved in it, he was trying to just promote himself in the rebellion. He really had no skin in the game, but he wanted to get himself political influence in the rebellion itself. So when it was going good, David Bradford was joining the bandwagon with the Whiskey Rebels. And I'm going to go into a little bit about the Whiskey Rebels and the rebellion in another segment. But when Bradford got involved, he was riding high on this prestige. But after a while, when the heat started coming on and the Watermelon Army started coming from the capital in Philadelphia and started roaming into the Western Territory here in southwestern Pennsylvania, David Bradford got scared. He got very intimidated because he knew that President Washington and the Federal Army, the Watermelon Army, were going to come and arrest him as a prominent figure or leader per se in the Whiskey Rebellion. So by 1794, by the fall of 1794, he got real scared and then ran to Pittsburgh, got to the Ohio River, and then tried to escape down the Ohio River, and finally got to Spanish-controlled Florida, where he bought a plantation and would live the rest of his life in exile. And it wasn't until President John Adams was president, in 1799, he was pardoned for his, let's just say, crimes against the United States federal government in being involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. And that is the basis of David Bradford. But as for the house itself, the house was, I think, bought by David Bradford. It was built by David Bradford in 1788 here on South Main Street, Washington. And by frontier standards, it was ranked as a mansion. And it was declared as a National Historic Landmark in 1983. And this building is amazing. It's a very prominent place down here because it is still standing. What's amazing about it is it's still standing here today, and it's a historical landmark that marks the timeline of the Whiskey Rebellion and the prominent figure David Bradford, as I reiterated. So on March 3rd, 1791, the excess tax on whiskey is passed by Congress. Now, as for me personally, as a Jeffersonian, I completely am against the whiskey tax that was brought upon by the U.S. Congress in 1791. Get closer. In the shade. So the reason why I'm against the whiskey tax in general is because it was an unfair tax on the people here in the Western Territories of early America. And me as a Jeffersonian, as I already said, I'm against Alexander Hamilton's schemes on to basically take money from the people. People here in the Western Territory did not really have cash. They didn't have currency. They used whiskey as currency. So what the unfair thing was that Alexander Hamilton did during the Washington administration is he decided to pay for the debts of the American Revolution by taxing the people's whiskey. Now, Thomas Jefferson, as I'm a cousin of him and as a Jeffersonian and a man of, just say, the common folk, I'm not of the Federalist mentality of Alexander Hamilton. I'm of the mentality of the people, the common folk here in southwestern PA, my region. And the reason why I am of that opinion is because these people depended on whiskey to buy goods. They depended on whiskey to buy food, to buy products, to buy supplies, to trade, basically. So when you're taking the money from the people, when you're taking their money that they don't have and basically stealing their whiskey, that is, to me, an egregious form of tyranny that the federal government conducted onto these people. And that is why by 1794, the volcano exploded into this region, and that's why the people basically in southwestern PA, Mingo Creek, Washington County, some parts of Allegheny County, or many other of the counties in southwestern Pennsylvania going into Virginia. That's why they resisted the excess tax or the whiskey tax, and that's why the federal government had to intervene. And I understand that the federal government had to basically control this region and uphold the law. I understand that, that the Constitution wanted to be, upheld by the federal government. But at the same time, it's pretty hypocritical that you fought a war, Hamilton, against basically tyranny, overtaxation, taxation without representation. And the same thing has been reoccurring in 1791 to 1794 on these people in southwestern Pennsylvania who actually were Revolutionary War veterans. So in my opinion, whose side do I take? I take the side of the whiskey rebels, because in my opinion, they were totally justified in their actions against the United States federal government. So right here, it says, on November 13th, 1794, the dreadful night, federal militia dragged 150 frontiersmen from their beds, arresting them for various crimes relating to the collapsed rebellion. And this is an example of what happens when the federal government exceeds its boundaries and tramples on the Constitution. And this is why I am for the whiskey rebels and the frontiersmen of the rebellion, especially the Mingo Creek rebels and the guys who lived in the territory, the common folk. Because what the federal government did is that they overstepped their boundaries and they basically trampled upon the Constitution, which Alexander Hamilton basically encouraged. And the Federalists basically wanted to strengthen the power of the federal government, which is the reason why I'm such a supporter of the whiskey rebels and of the common folk, the Jeffersonians, the anti-federalists, the aka Republicans of the 1790s, because they upheld the constitutional principles and constitutional rights of the common folk. And that's why I'm a huge supporter of the rebels in general, because they basically encapsulate and represent the constitutional principles of the American Revolution. Many of these guys, as I've said before, were American Revolutionary veterans. They fought against the British during the American Revolution. They were trying to uphold those principles and those rights that they fought and bled for 8 years against the British Army. And I feel that it is an injustice and it's a disgrace that Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist government during the Whiskey Rebellion was basically able to rise up this huge federal militia and march them into the Western Territory and basically arrest and capture these people without trial, without upholding the constitutional amendments passed by Congress, passed by we the people. And it really just shows what happens when you don't have a resistance against federal tyranny. And this would basically happen again. A rebellion would happen again during the Civil War. And as you know, with the Confederacy and the Civil War, federal tyranny would rise again during the Lincoln administration, and the common folk would have to rise up again against the same things that happened when Alexander Hamilton instigated tyranny against the common folk of southwestern PA. Right now I'm standing with the first president, George Washington, and the third president, Thomas Jefferson, both Virginians, right next to Washington and Jefferson College down here in Washington County, Pennsylvania. And as you know, General George Washington, many of my colonial ancestors fought under him during the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. And Thomas Jefferson, my second cousin 9 times removed, was the second cousin of my 7th great grandfather, Colonel John Harris. And ironically, my 7th great grandfather, John Harris, was business partners with George Washington and served with him in the Continental Army during the American Revolution, and they actually lived very close together in Virginia, in the same region. So this is a really cool statue and a really cool depiction of my ancestry and my connections with George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and my Virginian ancestors back in the colonial and early American days.